Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello and welcome back. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. And today we have with us a special guest. We've been trying to connect for quite a while, so we thank him very much. We'll start off by saying our guest is Jim Beaver. And Jim Beaver and his wife, Cecily Adams, they had it all, apparently. He was starring in HBO's Deadwood. She was casting that 70s show. They were building their dream house, and after a long and difficult fertility treatments, they at last had their beautiful daughter, Maddie. Well, then it all fell apart. Their child was diagnosed with autism, and Cecily, a non-smoking health nut, learned that she herself had stage 4 lung cancer, and what followed was a year of tragedy and terror. And through it all, Jim was putting together emails that he was sending out to friends and family members, and that ended up with a memoir called Life's That Way by Jim Beaver. And Jim is an actor, playwright, film historian. I want to get into that. Best known for his roles on Deadwood and Supernatural, dozens of TV shows, nearly 40 motion pictures, written plays, written books, written historical articles about film figures from the past, and all of that came from the book Life's That Way by Jim Beaver. So, Jim, just one question quickly. Like I asked earlier, have you had any sleep lately?
Well, it's been a work week. I've been shooting on Supernatural, and that always throws the schedule out a little bit. So I haven't had a lot of rest in the last few days, but I think I can make it through today.
And that's good. And now, weren't you in Hawaii earlier this month?
Yeah, I had a belated honeymoon trip to Hawaii a couple of weeks ago, and first time I had really been there, and it was a wonderful trip. And I got a little rest there, but I'm in need of some more now.
Yes, I know the feeling, because we're about the same age. So when those years catch up to you, you kind of need some more naps than you think you should. But
yeah. I try and take an hour or so to work every day, and the rest of it I try to nap. So
I think that's good. 23 out of 24, that works out. Yeah. Now, you were sorry to say that you lost your niece recently, so that must have not been a fun time at all, was it?
No. My beautiful 18-year-old niece, Kira Stanley, had been diagnosed 2 years earlier with DIPG, which is a rare brain cancer that affects mainly children. And she fought long and hard and lived far longer than most kids with that disease. But eventually we lost her on Christmas Day past. And it's been very hard for the whole family. And but she was a wonderful girl with an enormous spirit and a drive toward the good things in life. And I think she handled the ordeal better than an awful lot of people would, with a lot of grace and strength. So it's been a tough time.
Yeah. Well, are you doing okay now, do you think? I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's as the title of my book says, Life's That Way. It's something you move toward, and all of us in my family, I think, are very well attuned to that philosophy that hard things happen, and you experience them however you experience them, but you always keep putting one foot in front of the other and moving toward life. And if I've got a philosophy, that's it.
And of course, you never know what's around the next corner. So
no.
With us now is Jim Beaver. You know him, if nothing else, from Deadwood, Supernatural. But you were born in 1950. I was born in 1949, so we're about the same age, in Laramie, Wyoming. So, what was life like back in the 50s in Wyoming?
I don't have any idea. I left Wyoming about 6 months after I was born, and I grew up in and around Dallas, Texas. My dad had been going to graduate school at the University of Wyoming when I was born, but that was not our home state. And although I'm proud to call myself a Wyoming, I've never lived there after about 6 months of age. So, no, I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I was a preacher's kid, and I and my three sisters grew up in most of the time in suburbia, but there were times that we lived in areas where my dad had a church position that were much poorer areas than we had lived in other times, and I don't know. It was an interesting life, an interesting time to be growing up. I had a pretty what I would call a pretty happy childhood, and a great family that I'm very close to and always have been. So, not a lot of complaints.
Not a lot of complaints. Nope. And then when you got out of high school, you decided pretty much after graduating to sign up and join up with the services. You ended up being a radio operator in the Vietnam situation, the conflict. Now, from what I've heard, that's quite a dangerous job. Why'd you select that one?
Oh, I didn't select it. They handed it to me.
That's what I've heard. They decide for you.
Yeah, they looked at my test scores and saw that I was utterly incompetent to do anything that had to do with electronics, so they put me in radio.
Well, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
And yeah, no, I didn't have a terribly dangerous time there. I mean, everybody was occasionally subject to rocket attacks and things like that, but for the most part, I was what we called in the rear with the beer, and it was for the vast majority of my time in Vietnam with the Marines. It was relatively sedate compared to what a lot of guys were going through. So I was glad to come out of it pretty much in one piece, and not an experience I'd like to repeat, but one I'm grateful I had.
Yeah, and we talked earlier on the podcast with Carl Marlantes, who was a first lieutenant in the Marines in, 65, 66, I think. Talked about his experiences with his book. And I grew up kind of my teen years, let's say, from 4 to 14. Well, you probably passed through White Rock, in White Rock, Crescent Beach, just south of Vancouver and just north of Blaine, Washington. And I go across the border and I see, Vietnam Memorial, kids my age that would have been like 10 miles away from me, and they're off buried somewhere in Saigon or wherever. And it just had no effect, literally, for us in my generation, and yet that was a big thing hanging over your heads. So how did you guys deal with it? Did you some took off and moved to Canada, and some went back to school, and I guess some joined up? So
yeah, well, it was we had a pretty hefty draft back then, so there were young personnel from all walks of life. Although, as with most things, the burden falls heaviest on the poor, the people without resources. So, but it was, a lot of people made a lot of different choices. I always believe that if you're following your conscience and you've got a conscience, then you're probably doing the right thing. I didn't join up with any particular political bent. I had buddies from high school who joined up, and I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I guess I'll try it. But I wasn't setting out to save the world or anything, and I wasn't terribly politically aware at the time. It was just seemed like kind of an interesting thing to do, and there were times I regretted my choice, especially when I had some drill instructor screaming at me. But
right.
All in all, in retrospect, it was a good thing for me. I learned a lot about being an adult from that experience, and it's served me well in a lot of ways since then.
The only things that come out of Dallas, Texas are queers and steers. Which one are you?
Oh, I heard that a few times.
That's what I thought.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking with Jim Beaver, actor, playwright, film historian, having a good little chat here, I hope. So you're an actor, a writer, a film historian. Which came first? You took some acting classes in college? Is that how it got going?
Well, I had gotten hooked on film history as a kid, and I was really fascinated by it. And I had always wanted to work in that field. I love doing research. I love doing looking into the biographies of people who worked and created in the film industry. And but when I got out of the Marines and went to college, there weren't a lot of courses in film history to be had unless you lived in Los Angeles, and I didn't. And so I signed up for theater classes thinking it would be somewhat related, and I got involved with the theater department at my college, and just discovered that I really, really loved it, and decided there and then that was going to be the career for me. I didn't have any particular hopes that I would succeed at it, but I thought, I can't imagine doing anything that I love more. And I ended up being fortunate enough to be able to do it for a living for an awful lot of years now.
Now, do you have a daily routine even now, or is your schedule just too hectic these days to have any sort of daily routine?
No, I think routine flew out the window when I decided to become an actor. It's one of the most unpredictable careers anybody could choose, because you never know when you're going to work. You never know how soon you're going to work. You rarely know how long you're going to work, and that's both in terms of how long a job lasts, and even on a day-to-day basis, you rarely know what time you're going to work 2 days from now, and so it's not for the faint-hearted. If you really need to have all your ducks in a row and always know what you're going to be doing, it's the wrong career. You can have wonderful stretches of good fortune that last a year or two and seem to guarantee that the road ahead will be as bright or brighter, and then find out that you're in the worst slump you've ever experienced. It's very haphazard. and even day to day, I don't always know. I could get a phone call in an hour telling me to be in Toronto or Vancouver or New York, and by tomorrow afternoon. And I've gotten pretty used to making quick adjustments because you have to. But once again, I got no complaints. It's a little nerve-wracking sometimes not knowing whether schedules are going to work out. If you've got something planned, you can almost guarantee that the phone's going to ring and they're going to come call and tell you to do something different than you had planned. They say in the business that the best way to get a job is to plan a vacation.
Right.
So, it's because they always seem to. That's why I had a delayed honeymoon. I got married in June, and every time we planned a trip, a job would come up. So, but that's the kind of trouble I came to Hollywood to have. So, you're not going to hear me moaning about it.
No. And like you've gotten the introduction to Life's That Way, announcing your plans is a good way to hear God laugh. You want a vacation?
Yeah.
Okay, kid, here, we're going to give you a 6-week roll in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Exactly. So what was your first big break in Hollywood that you would consider your big break?
Well, it was kind of twofold. I had... in college, I started writing plays, and I had some minor success having plays produced around the country. Nothing to make me rich or to write home about, but I was always planning to be an actor, but I enjoyed writing these plays and seeing them produced, and I had written one that was produced in Los Angeles very successfully, and I got a big agent out of that who immediately got me work writing for television, and so I was doing pretty well writing for television. This was in the mid-'80s, and so in one sense that was a big break. Although it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. If I was going to write, I was much more interested in writing my own stories rather than just, episodes of TV series featuring existing characters and plot lines. But then, in kind of a fluke, I was introduced to one of the acting agents at my agency who gave me an opportunity to audition as an actor for a big movie called In Country, which starred Bruce Willis, and which was about Vietnam vets after the war. And to everyone's surprise, I got a major co-starring role in this film, and that turned out to be the big break because the bottom kind of fell out of the freelance television writing business, and I stopped getting work in that arena, but I started getting work as an actor all over the place. So I would really say that Norman Jewison's film In Country was my biggest break, the biggest break I've ever had, really. I guess second to it was years later after I'd done a lot of work, but still nobody really knew who I was. In 2002, getting cast in the HBO series Deadwood, and that really changed everything. But I had been working for a long time before that. Just nobody much knew it.
So we're combining a little bit of talking about your writing career, Jim Beaver, his acting career, talking about Deadwood, Supernatural. So when you're acting, now do you have a tendency to want to change the lines or think that you can come up with a better one? Or do you just go, nope, that's what's down there and this is what they've hired me to do, and so that's what I'm going to do?
It's very much the latter. As a writer of plays and television scripts and film scripts, I know how carefully the words are crafted by the writer. I know that a lot of work has gone into it, and my job as an actor isn't to rewrite it. My job is to interpret it to the best of my ability, to get across the points that the writer has made. So there are times I think I could have done a lot better job, but it's not my job. So
so you keep that to yourself.
And of course, yeah. I mean, if you're doing Shakespeare, you better be saying the lines the way they're written.
Right.
If you're doing, CSI Dubuque, then you may be able to have a conversation with the writers and the producers and say, what would it maybe be better if I said it this way? It's a collaborative process, and it's not like you get your head bitten off if you suggest something. But I would never, under normal circumstances, just ad lib or rewrite a line.
Right.
It's not my place.
Not your job.
And I don't like people to do it with my own stuff.
Yeah. So that's what I was thinking. You wouldn't want to do it to others because you wouldn't want people to do it to yours. So.
Exactly.
And now, how did Supernatural come around? Because we first glommed onto you, as it were, from being Bobby Singer on Supernatural with those two idiots. So, who came up with the idiots line? Was it written that way, or did you chuck it in there?
It was written that way.
Oh.
I didn't. I don't think I ever said the word until I saw it in the script. And, like I said, I don't, as a general rule, I don't write this stuff.
Yeah.
I do remember I kind of argued the point because I thought it was kind of a stupid word, but I had no idea it was going to take off and become Bobby's catchphrase.
Right.
And now I've embraced it. So. But at the time I first saw it in a script, I said, "That's weird. Why didn't he just say idiots?"
Right.
But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I had done a series in the early '90s called Reasonable Doubts, where I played a homicide cop partnered with Mark Harmon, and the producer of that show years later called me up basically and asked me to do a single episode of Supernatural, which he was now producing. And so I came up and did one episode, and I guess they liked what I did because they started writing some more. And 15 years later, I've been in every season, and it really, it's a role and a show that's really changed my life. It's given me a pretty good living, and it's given me a chance to travel the world and meet fans. So
right.
I guess it's a good thing I did a halfway okay job in that first series because he remembered me 10, 12 years later and gave me another shot. And that shot has really been heard around the world.
Now, when you're based in Los Angeles and you come up to, what kind of work permits and hoops do you have to jump through to work in Vancouver in Canada?
Well, I don't know all the rules, but I know that each production has to separately, individually arrange with the Canadian government and the Canadian actors unions to bring in a foreign national to work on something. It's from my end the only thing that's involved is whenever I show up in Canada to begin a job, I have to go through the immigration department and turn in certain paperwork that the production company has already arranged, and so I go in and stand in line for an hour or two and get that paperwork done. And that's it. I don't know exactly what goes into creating all that paperwork, but I think, as I understand it, Canada allows a certain number of foreign actors to work on shows, and as long as a certain larger number of Canadian actors have jobs on those same shows. It's often a matter of if the American or the foreign actor has a certain track record and is well known enough that they consider them a more valuable entity for the show than perhaps an unknown Canadian actor, then they allow the productions to bring somebody in. But most of the outside of the major characters, most of the roles on a show like Supernatural are performed by Canadians. There's only usually a bare handful of Americans on the show.
Right. And how do you, overall, how do you like working in Vancouver? It's not too rainy for you?
Well, it's Vancouver. There's a lot of rain, but I love the city. And when it's not raining, it's absolutely gorgeous there. It's comfortable. Yeah, sure, I could do with a little less rain, but more because we sometimes have to film in it and pretend it's not raining, and it can get kind of cold and wet when you're pretending you're in Alabama in the summer.
Right.
But I love the city. I've always enjoyed being there, and with the show ending this year, I'm afraid that my chances of visiting Vancouver will become more rare, which disappoints me because I really like the city, and I have absolutely fallen in love over the years with the crew on the show. There's a cliche about Canadians being nice and polite and friendly, and there's a reason for that cliche, because I found it to be true. I really enjoy the people I work with in Canada.
Just go to a junior hockey game and we'll knock that cliche out the window.
Yeah, well,
anyway.
I've discovered I don't make enough money to go see hockey, but I've really enjoyed these past few years being in Vancouver, and of course I go back and forth, so
yes.
It's I don't really know what it would be like to live there year after year, but I certainly love my visits.
Good. And we're talking with Jim Beaver here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, talking about writing and acting, Supernatural, Deadwood, etc., other projects and programs. Just a couple more questions, if you don't mind, about the back behind-the-scenes stuff about making a movie or TV show, and then I want to ask you about your John Garfield book, for example.
Oh, okay.
So when you're filming a role like in Supernatural, now, do they give you all your scenes at once, even though if they're not going to be in for like 6 or 8 episodes down the road? Do you just get thrown all of those at once and everybody has to do those scenes and then it's on to something else?
No, we shoot one episode at a time.
Okay.
And we don't shoot the scenes in order usually.
No.
But I'll usually get a script a couple of weeks before I start an episode, and gives me time to work on it and learn it, and then we shoot in whatever order the locations and the availability of the other actors requires. But we usually do one episode and then we move on to the next one. I never know what's going to happen far down the line until we get there.
Okay.
So if I'm in the first episode of a season, by the time I start work, it's possible I might know what's going to happen in the second episode, but I won't know much beyond that.
Now, are all the scripts prepared in advance?
No, in fact, my understanding is they just finished the script for the last episode of the season a couple of weeks ago. So they write for a month or so before we start work, and then they're always just a few weeks ahead of shooting. So I don't know. I haven't spent a lot of time in the writer's room, but my sense is that they're just 3 or 4 weeks ahead of us most of the time. And sometimes I wonder, because they sometimes paint themselves into corners in the beginning episodes and find out that they don't even realize how they're going to get out of it.
Then they got to get out of it, and they don't know how. Right. What are we going to do here? Back to making a TV show like Supernatural. My pet peeve is people who fake smoke in movies. Like they'll have a little quick puff and blow it out. It's so quick that nobody who really smokes would ever do it that way. And then that cigarette's gone. Or fake rain, because I know what fake rain looks like. Because real rain you can't necessarily see on film. But fake rain, and we'll see sunshine in the background, and the guys Sam and Dean are getting drenched from the fire hose that's on the side there with the wind machine blowing, and I'm like, why do they just not have the rain and the fake cigarette smoking? Doesn't seem to add up.
Well, I think there's a lot less cigarette smoking than there used to be, simply because there's a lot fewer smokers than there used to be.
Right. Heck.
It's, I mentioned that series I had worked on years earlier for the same producer, and I played a chain smoker on it, and yet I didn't smoke. But I kind of smoked by the time I got done with the show, because I have that same pet peeve. I can always tell when somebody isn't a smoker and is trying to fake it. So I ended up inhaling when I was on camera, and it kind of threw me back into the habit for a while. But it's in that one sense alone, I'm glad that show didn't last too long, because it had been awfully hard to quit years before, and I think we talked about it once. I never did a single scene in 2 years that I didn't have a cigarette.
Oh boy.
But sometimes the weather just doesn't cooperate with you, and the minute a scene needs to take place in the rain, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have good weather.
Right.
Also, the fake rain is controllable.
Right.
Real rain, like you said, it's not always easy to see it on film, and but also, it can take several hours to shoot a single scene, and you're in trouble if the sun comes up in the middle of that couple of hours, because all of a sudden the camera angles aren't going to match.
Yep, nothing's going to work.
Yeah. So, they do what they have to do.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yep. So, cigarette smoke, was that real cigarettes, or were they those clove cigarettes, or?
The ones I've always dealt with were real.
Oh.
I haven't had to deal with it much in recent years, but back in 90, 91, 92, when I was doing that show, it was real cigarettes. And of course, the length of the cigarette has to match. So every time it got too short, somebody would bring me a new one.
Right.
And so basically, you could end up shooting a scene that you were smoking the equivalent of a 7-foot cigarette because they just kept adding to it. And I was usually pretty sick by the end of the day, every day.
Right.
And I'm glad that phase is over.
Good. And we're with Jim Beaver having a wonderful conversation, talking about movies, writing, books, Supernatural, Deadwood. And you did a book a while back about the actor John Garfield. Now, when I watch I love movies from the 30s and 40s. Who doesn't? I guess he's never been one of my favorites. But what attracted you to him and his life story?
Well, the truth is kind of prosaic. I was reading a lot of actor biographies and filmographies in those days, as I still do. And I was in college at this time, and I had this notion that writing one of those kinds of books would be pretty easy. And I looked at the variety of actors who didn't yet have books about them, and I liked Garfield a lot. I was a big fan of his films and his work, but he had the added advantage of, for me, of having died fairly young and having a pretty brief career. And I thought the number of films I'll have to deal with is fairly short, so it should be something I could probably tackle. And in fact, I wrote it while I was in college. I probably should have been paying more attention to my studies, but most of my effort in those days went into researching this book. And it's not, it's a book I'm proud of in that I wrote it when I was in college and I got it published. And a certain number of people have liked it, and John Garfield's daughter told me once that it was her favorite book about her father.
Well, that's good.
At the same time, I look back on it and I think, oh, if I'd been older and wiser, I could have done this much better. But it was a learning experience and something I'm very proud of. More so because I got it done than for whatever quality it might have. Looking back, I think it was incredibly naive to think I could write and publish a book while I was also going to college, but somehow or other I pulled it off.
It worked.
But yeah. That was a long time ago.
And it's always there.
They can it would work now.
They can never take it away from you. It's always there.
That's true.
Yep.
It's true. I mean, it's very nice to. Well, when I first met Cecily, the woman who would become my wife back in the 80s, she was an old movie fan as well, and when we first met, she pulled out a book from her shelf and said, "Oh, you might be interested in this film book." And I said, "Yeah, actually, I wrote it." And I was kind of shocked that she had a copy of my book there, but and she hadn't made the connection because everybody calls me Jim, and that book was written under the name James.
Right.
And so that was kind of fun. And you're right. It's I see it sitting on the shelf, and I realize not a lot of people bought it, but every once in a while somebody comes up and asks me to sign a copy, and it makes me feel like like I accomplished something in my early age, maybe a little more than some guys my age might have pulled off, but it's a lot less than other people
Right.
accomplished. So,
Yeah. We're with Jim Beaver here today. We're talking about his John Garfield book. You can look it up at your library, perhaps. And John Garfield, famous for such movies. Well, everybody knows The Postman Always Rings Twice. And Seawolf, he was in that with Edward G. Robinson. So that's just a couple to look up. And how's your George Reeves project going?
well, it's been going on for a very long time. Anyone who knows me probably has known I was working on it the entire time they've known me. I started it not long after the John Garfield book came out, and but I started it not realizing that there was a lot more material together. It's a different kind of book. It's a full-scale biography, whereas the Garfield book was more of a filmography, a film-by-film study of his work.
All right.
The George Reeves book is a full birth-to-death biography, and I wasn't really, when I started it, I wasn't really expecting to have my own acting career that would keep me as busy as mine has. So it's been a situation where I work on it a while, and then I put it aside for a few months to go do a job, and then come back to it. And I'm in the process of organizing all of my years of research and interviews right now, and I've gathered so much material over the years that the organization is almost as hard as doing the research. But it's coming along. I work on it almost every day now. I've got a little more free time on my hands, and I'm doing my best to, I'm hoping to get it done before everybody who ever heard of him is dead. I think that would be practical.
Right. Well, he's an interesting character.
Yeah, I always, he's best known, of course, for playing Superman in the 1950s on television, and for the uncertain and not quite understood circumstances of his death.
Right.
And I think that I got into it mainly because of those factors. I had been a fan when I was a kid, but then as I learned more about him and his life, I realized that there was an interesting story here to tell about the kind of actor who really never quite got beyond a certain level, who wasn't a Clark Gable or a Humphrey Bogart, who was known worldwide and had was rich from it. It was an actor a little more along the lines of what a lot of my career has been, just supporting parts and sometimes long stretches without work, or doing work that you don't necessarily feel great about doing, but you have to. And I thought that kind of life hasn't been covered as much as the really superstar actors' lives have been. And then, of course, there was the fact that there are an awful lot of people who are still fans of his and want to know more about his life and death. And I think I'm going to answer most of their questions and provide some insights they may not have considered. And I think, too, that it will be... I think my own perspective as an actor will bring something to it that not every biographer would be able to. Just, having an awareness of how films and TV programs are made, and how the work process and the getting hired process actually works.
Right.
Because a lot of people have ideas about what it's like to be a journeyman actor without really knowing, and some of their ideas are very off base. People are always asking me, what's it like at the Academy Awards, and I don't know. I've never been. I'm not the kind of actor that gets invited to the Academy Awards. A lot of people, think I've got 4 houses spread around the world, and that's for a character actor or supporting actor. That's just not the reality. And I think a lot of the struggles that George Reeves went to, especially late in his career, are very much because he never achieved that kind of power in the business. He achieved a lot of fame in the last few years of his life playing this very popular character, but it wasn't, in those days, a show about Superman was done on a shoestring budget.
Right.
Nobody acting in it was getting rich. They were just, barely getting by. And things have changed a lot. If that show were on now and he were the star of it, he'd be making a lot more money than he ever made in 1952.
Exactly.
So that's an area where I think my own experience as an actor can shed some light. And I'm just working away at it.
Yep.
I'm going to finish it before too terribly long.
Well, it was like that documentary that was out a while back. Aren't you that guy who was in that thing? So
yeah,
people know who you are, but they don't know who you are.
So, apparently, I wasn't familiar enough to even make it into that documentary. So, but a lot of those guys are my friends. So it's I get a lot of aren't you that guy who? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's not a bad place to be, because I can still go to a restaurant and not get surrounded by people who won't let me eat.
Right.
It's I make my living, and I pay my rent, and I can walk down the street without getting mobbed, which I suspect Tom Hanks and Brad Pitt can't do.
That's right. So they may not be Jim Beaver, but Jim, you're not them either. So that's everybody's on their own level, and that's fine. So,
well, doing something you love for a living and being happy with the work and not worrying too much about where the next meal's coming from is pretty much my definition of success. I don't have to have a jet plane and a yacht and a house in the islands. I'm very content with what I've got, and if somebody wants to give me more, sure, I'll take it.
Right.
But life is very good. Life is very good at the spot, at the level I find myself. So hard to complain.
Hard to complain. And this is Jim Beaver who is with us. We started off talking about his book, Life's That Way. And we understand you have an audio version out about that?
Yeah. It took a while for us to get that out, but the audio version, which I read, came out just a few months ago, and is available pretty much everywhere. I was very interested in doing an audiobook version of the book because I get there are only limited foreign languages that the paper version of the book. There are a lot of people, because of the supernatural fan base. I've been able to interest an awful lot more people in the book than might normally have been the case, and a lot of those people live outside the English-speaking world, and they understand English because they watch the show in English,
Right.
But they may not be able to get a copy of the book. In a lot of people understand English who can't read it. They understand it to hear it, and it was. I really wanted to be able to do an audio book for, in a large part, for fans of Supernatural who were in other countries who would be able to listen to it, but might not be able to pick it up in a language they could read.
Good.
So, and it seems to be accomplishing that, getting a lot of orders from outside the U.S. and Canada, and that's very rewarding to me because it's not. I'm not going to make any money off the audio book. Really, it's may never pay for itself. But the larger point for me is just a wider audience for what's in the book, which it kind of surprised me. I never quite expected this. These emails that I sent out during the period of a year of my wife's illness and following her death, I never expected it to be meaningful to anyone except friends and family. But people began sharing those emails and spreading them out until people all around the world were reading them and following along my story. And people kept encouraging me after the end of that year of email journaling to collect them all into a book. And I thought, why? It's, who's going to buy it? Just my friends and family, and they've already read it.
Right.
But fortunately, I got talked out of that.
Good.
And a number of people pointed out to me that they had found what I wrote about and how I wrote to be very helpful in their own situations, their own experiences with in a family hit by cancer, their own experiences in a family hit by grief, and that they felt like my recounting, my explanation of my experiences might be helpful to others. And indeed, it seems like that's the case because I've had a great deal of success with the book in terms of people finding it useful. Like I said, I never really expected that, but I can't deny the reality of what people tell me. And a fellow came up to me once and told me that he had just gone through an experience similar to mine, and he said, you wrote in the book that it's very difficult to go through this process because there's no guidebook for how to do it. And probably the most meaningful thing anybody's ever said to me, he said, well, I found your book to be my guidebook. And I was very, very moved by that, very touched. But it also kind of helped me understand why the book can be meaningful. I discovered when I was experiencing what I went through with the illness and loss of my wife and my daughter's situation that people very often don't talk about such things. And they don't, I think probably we've all known someone who for example, dies from cancer, and we're surprised because we didn't know they had it.
Right. Didn't know it was even a problem. Yeah.
And people have been reluctant to talk about it, to talk about their fears, to talk about the things that we don't even necessarily associate with the illness. Just the fact that you can be in a dire situation in your family, and that doesn't keep the dishwasher from breaking, or the roof from blowing off in a storm. You still have to deal with daily life.
Right.
And the fact that I felt very early on that I needed to be honest about the experience, that I needed to tell it like it really was and not pretty it up for people, not to try and tell my friends and family that, oh, everything's wonderful, don't worry about us, but rather to say, today was an awful day, all we did was cry. I think that it certainly helped me go through the experience. It helped me work through and process what was happening. And writing about it and having other people read it, I've discovered seems to have had a similar effect on people who read it, that it's allowed them to articulate for themselves what their lives are like, or to understand better what to expect if something like this comes into your life. And
yep.
I think that I try very, very hard not to act like I'm presenting a gift to people with this. It was just my story, but I think it's not so much a gift as it is a lesson, and that is that the more you share what's going on in your life, the easier it is to deal with what's going on in your life. Keeping the hard things in life to ourselves doesn't give you the shoulders to lean on that you need. And when things get really bad, you need shoulders to lean on. And it's no crime to take advantage of that. It may be the thing that gets you through it. And I certainly found that to be true, and it meant something to me to be able to share that.
Right, and the book again is Life's That Way by Jim Beaver. You can look for it and look for the audio book. And we want to thank you very much for your time today, sir, Mr. Jim Beaver, from Deadwood, from Supernatural, from Thunder Alley, from all sorts of shows. A book about John Garfield's out there. He's written plays, working on a study of TV's first Superman, George Reeves, who also was in Gone with the Wind in 1938, so his career goes way back. So, sir, thank you very much for your time today, and now I hope you can get some more sleep.
Oh, well, thank you, Dennis. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you've been enjoying Talking Books and Stuff. Please support us on Patreon to help cover our costs. Please click on the Patreon links, or you can visit our GoFundMe page. Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.